Aloha and welcome. My name is Deidre Teagarden. I am the Executive Director here at the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center, where our mission is to inspire people to find the hero within themselves through the legacy of the Nisei veterans. We welcome all of you and are so honored to have Mr. Micah Kane of Hawaii Community Foundation join us today for our Take Leadership Series talk, where we invite leaders from across the state to join us and talk a little bit about this new normal that we are all trying to navigate through. Take, of course, means bamboo in Japanese, known for its resilience and its strength in times of difficulty, something, of course, we can all understand right now. A few housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker today. First off, want to mahalo our sponsors. Without their generosity, we would not be able to offer these programs free to our Nisei Veterans Memorial Center, Ohana. So please help me thank HouseMart, Maui Sons and Daughters of the Nisei Veterans, Maui Health Systems, Abbey Carpet of Maui, Sei Design, Munekio Haraga, Puro Water Specialty Company, and our Azumi Brothers. Thank you so much. A few more housekeeping items. This is being recorded and will be available on our Nisei Veterans Memorial Center YouTube channel within about a week and a half. So we encourage you to go there and share this talk with your friends and colleagues. And also we are in webinar mode, which means you can see us, but we can't see you. So please rest assured that your privacy is being protected. And toward the end of the talk, we will be opening it up for questions. So you can see the bottom left corner of your screen has a little question and answer box. Please just send us your questions as you have them, and we'll get to as many as possible before the end of the talk. We will be following up with an email to all of you, as well as our weekly Wednesday email update. You can unsubscribe from these emails at any time, but we do hope that you stay engaged and stay subscribed so you know what's happening here at the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center on Maui. And after all, you are part of our Nisei Veterans Ohana. Now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Micah A. Kane is the CEO and president of the Hawaii Community Foundation, the state's largest and oldest foundation that works with individuals, families, foundations, government agencies, and organizations to transform lives and improve our communities. Prior to taking on the role in July of 2017, as the third CEO and president in Hawaii Community Foundation's 100-year history, Micah served as its president and chief operating officer. He was responsible for leading the executive team and day-to-day operations. He also served as an HCF Board of Governor for 8 years prior to joining Hawaii Community Foundation. His previous work and experience include serving as Chief Operating Officer of Pacific Links International, responsible for operations and acquisitions of all residential and resort development in Hawaii. He was also the chairman of the Hawaiian Homelands Commission and the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, a 200,000-acre Native Hawaiian land trust. Micah also served as the Government Affairs Liaison for the Building Industry Association of Hawaii. He is raised in Hawaii and is a graduate of the Kamehameha Schools, Menlo College, and received his MBA from the Scheidler College of Business at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Over the years, Kane has been recognized with various awards, including the Koa Anvil Award of Excellence, the Salvation Army Partners in the Community Service Award, the Hawaiian Leader of the Year Award from Ko'olaupoko Hawaiian Civic Club, Ho'oulu Leadership Award for Government, Menlo College Hall of Fame Football Inductee, the Environmental Council Award, Spirit of the Year Award from the Aloha United Way, and the Housing Advocate of the Year Award from the Building Industry Association of Hawaii. Micah currently serves as a trustee for the Kamehameha Schools and is a corporate board of director with the Hawaiian Electric Industries. And he is very busy, especially with everything going on right now with COVID-19. So we are just thrilled that he has some time for us this afternoon. So please help me give Micah a very warm Maui welcome. How are you?
Good, Deidre. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for making the time to come on. We're really thrilled.
Proud to be here.
So, just jumping right into this, we've been talking off and on for a while now, and in preparation for this interview, you told me something I had no idea. You were talking about your relationship with the Nisei community, and I was unaware how far back your relationship goes with the whole Nisei community. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's very near and dear to my heart, Deidre. But before I get to that, I do want to acknowledge your leadership and extend my gratefulness and our gratefulness to Mr. Leonard Oka, who is the co-founder of your organization, as you know, as well as your president, Brian Moto, who, during these times, this leadership is needed. And I want to thank them for all that they're doing for the Nisei community and our community at large. I also would like to acknowledge a very dear friend who I believe might be joining us, who is someone that I respect tremendously in our community, Mr. Paul Yonamine, who was one of your speakers, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And, we're so grateful to have him back in Hawaii. His leadership as chairman at Central Pacific Bank, and we interface with him a lot. And we're very grateful for his leadership. And so I did want to just start by acknowledging, your leadership and appreciate all that they do. But yeah, you're right. I really enjoyed our pre-conversation, Deidre, before we started, because I've been very honored and privileged, for the last 25 years being married to my wife, Joelle Segawa. I've been exposed to a part of the Japanese culture that I truly, truly appreciate. And while I'm very proud of my Hawaiian heritage, I've come to really appreciate the Japanese heritage, especially here in Hawaii. My wife is a sixth generation immigrant from Japan. Her ancestor, Tokujiro Sato, was part of the Ganin Mono, the first group that came over. And it's his legacy that is embedded in our family, and it's something that's very important to us. Both of her grandparents, Kenji Segawa from Ka'u, was a member of the 442nd, as well as Wataru Iwanaga from Holualoa, Hawaii on the Big Island, also a member of the 442, which are also very important leaders that are important legacies in our family. And it's very important to my wife and I, and that we share their legacy with our daughters. And so I just wanted to share that because it's something that's very important to our family and guides us. So thank you for that opportunity to share that, Deidre.
Yeah, and the Gannen Mono, they had a big celebration about 2 years ago, which was, quite amazing. And I did not know that you were related to that family and Tokujiro Sato. That's what a small world.
It is. But I tell you, when they all got together over at the Japanese Cultural Center, gosh, there's a lot of them. And it's amazing, how many cousins and uncles and aunties, they now have. And it was a beautiful opportunity for everybody to get to meet each other.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Wow. I mean, and so Hawaii, right? So such a Hawaii story. All right. So, for those who might not know about Hawaii Community Foundation and what you do and, your very long history here, can you just give us a little 101 on Hawaii Community Foundation?
Yeah, as you stated in the opening, in the introduction, we've been around for over 100 years, and we were born in 1916. We manage over $700 million in financial assets that are compiled through over 1,000 different funds that we manage. And these funds aren't just funds, they're people and they're organizations. Some no longer with us, and we've had the privilege to administer their dreams. They left their resources to us to try to achieve good things. And when we take that privilege very, very seriously. But we also do a lot of work for organizations and people who are still with us. And we spend a lot of our time trying to get up the pipeline of challenges that exist in our communities, through what we call the change framework, which is a data-based assessment of the well-being of people in place in Hawaii. We identify those areas of inequities that are in our community, and we try to drive our resources to change those things and to change those systems. And so a lot of our human capital, a lot of our financial capital is spent on trying to drive policy changes in Hawaii to make life better for people. And so that's what you probably see a lot more of in the news when you see the Hawaii Community Foundation, because we're trying to drive that kind of systemic change in Hawaii.
And I know that you, within your role, are very involved with everything that's going on now. I think you're on a lot of different community boards, talking about changing that framework, not only for what you do, but for our state right now and everything that's going on with COVID. But our community is moving so fast. And even before COVID came to our islands, we were having issues with the high cost of living, just to name, one of the bigger topics. How has Hawaii Community Foundation really changed in the last few years to address the various challenges? And now that coronavirus is here, how have you changed again?
Sure. I touched on it a little bit in the earlier answer, but maybe I can elaborate a little bit more, Deidre. We're trying to be more data decision-making based versus emotion-based so that we can drive policy changes. And that's the primary shift that we've tried to make over the past 4 to 6 years right now. The adoption of a framework that we call the change framework. It's an acronym for community and economy, health and wellness, arts and culture, the natural environment, government and civic engagement, and education. And then under those 6 sectors sit 19 subsectors that are fed by 64 indicators that can quantitatively tell us how the people in Hawaii are doing. And so we can tell you by data how the people in Maui are doing. And it was from that framework that we highlighted a study that we undertook in partnership with the Bank of Hawaii, Kamehameha Schools, and Aloha United Way, that started socializing the concept of what's known now as the ALICE report. ALICE is an acronym for individuals and families who are asset limited, income constrained, and employed. So they're working poor. These people are working hard, but they're not making it. And so prior to COVID, 42% of our population was an ALICE family. That means they're one paycheck away from not making it, from being homeless. That's a fragile community. These are people that are actually working 1, 2, and in some cases 3 jobs. They're stacked up in multi-families in one dwelling. Post-COVID right now, 58% of our families are ALICE families. And so what we saw as a result of COVID is an exacerbation of some of these inequities in our community. And so we're hyper-focused on eliminating those issues. In January of 2020, in partnership with the Governor's Office, the State Senate, as well as the House of Representatives, we introduced a package of legislation that focused on 3 primary areas that we saw as critical to helping our local families thrive here. One was a focus on affordable housing, and it was putting resources and addressing some of the regulatory issues within that space that would really drive change. So prior to, it included $200 million of infrastructure for Oahu and $50 million of infrastructure for the neighbor islands. It also mandated that every family in Hawaii, every kid in Hawaii in the age of 3 to 5 have access to early childhood education. Right now, even if you have the money, only 1 out of every 2 kids has access to early childhood education. And then the third was to start addressing some of the income inequalities that exist in our community. And it was to start looking at very incremental small changes to our minimum wage that did it in a way that didn't impact negatively to our small business community. Unfortunately, again, we were hijacked by COVID. And so we had to pivot but really those challenges just kind of got exacerbated. And that's where a lot of our funding and partnerships have gone for HCF's work during this COVID period.
You mentioned the neighbor islands. I know HCF has neighbor island offices. We're in contact with ours here. How closely have you been working with leadership on the neighbor islands?
Very closely. We hold very near and dear to our decision making the opinions and perspectives of our neighbor island staff, as well as our neighbor island leadership. We do have a leadership council on every neighbor island. They're people that give us guidance. We've spent a tremendous amount of time in communication with Mayor Victorino, who has been very active in this space and has been a very active voice in your community. But we've been also very active on Kauai as well as Hawaii Island. And so, our neighbor island offices are extremely important. And we also see that some of the numbers on the neighbor islands are much higher than here on Oahu as it relates to some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier.
Well, I think Maui has definitely been hit hard with our lack of visitors coming in. But that's nice to know that you're working closely with our government leaders. And I know some of them are on our call today. So if people from Maui or the other neighbor islands that are watching wanted to get more involved with Hawaii Community Foundation in what you're doing right now, should they be reaching out to those neighbor island offices?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it would start by just going to our website and getting familiar with some of the areas that we're focused on, and we hope it would inspire you to think about engaging. And there's many ways to engage, either through a nonprofit that we're partnering with or that we're supporting, or engaging with us. Our website is at www.hawaiicommunityfoundation.org, and I'm sure we can provide that to your listeners and your viewers directly, but we would welcome their engagement in any way. And it's just not just financial. I mean, I think, financial contributions are very important, but people's time is very valuable. People's words are very valuable. And again, if those things are not available, your thoughts, prayers always help. We welcome them as well.
Great. Well, talking about funding, early on in the pandemic, you launched your Hawaii Resilience Fund, and to date, you have raised over $12 million and awarded another $11 million in grants to various organizations. Have you been surprised by the generosity of the donors out there in Hawaii?
I have not at all, actually. And in fact, I mean, they've really stepped up, and I'm not surprised. We saw this in some of the prior work that we've been involved in. A few years back when we got engaged with the Kauai floods, we saw our community across the state rise up to support Kauai in trying to make their island bounce back faster. And we raised a few $1 million there from very generous people across the state. Some even came from around the country and some around the world. And then with the volcano flow over on the Hawaii Island, again, we have set up another fund and people stepped up again. And so seeing what we're seeing today with this pandemic and the amount of individuals that are not, I mean, it's been broad and it's been deep. We've seen people, Deidre, a young kid from Kauai, 12 years old, who gave us a $20 bill with a note, saying to put this to good work. We had a yoga instructor who has given their fees and their dues from their instructions to the fund, to very large contributions from our corporate community, like First Hawaiian Bank, who provided $1 million contribution specifically to the class of 2020 to help those kids bridge into post-secondary completion. If you recall, the last semester of the DOE was eliminated. And so that's the most critical time that our seniors in the public school system are really tying into a college counselor. They're identifying what kind of resources are available. That got eliminated. And so with the help of First Hawaiian Bank, we were able to set up a program in partnership with the University of Hawaii to bridge them, to provide one-on-one counseling. We have over 3,000 kids in that program right now. And then with they partnered with us with $1 million each to fund the scholarship program. And then Bank of Hawaii stepped up with a $3 million contribution to partner with the various counties, including Maui, to help feed families across the state. And so it's been broad, it's been deep, and it's still happening. And the need is still there right now, Deidre, unfortunately.
Yeah. And do you see an end? Do you see an end to this? Now we just heard that Oahu is going into another 2-week shutdown starting on Thursday. I mean, what is the conversation over there at HCF? I mean, how do you make that decision on where to put the funding? And what are the role of the nonprofits? I know you talk about partnering a lot. Are you relying more heavily on the nonprofit community right now?
We are, and they're stepping up. They were challenged in many of the same ways that our business community was challenged. Many of the indicators that drive their success are the indicators that drive businesses' success, and their models are changing. We've had to really rely on a lot of our more higher capacity nonprofits to do work that they weren't traditionally doing, but because they have the infrastructure behind them, we've had to persuade them to do different kinds of work. Getting the YMCA throughout the state to think about doing, childcare, so that essential workers could go to work. Getting different nonprofits to stand up distribution systems for protective wear, PPE, and funding them to collect voluntarily made PPE and cleanse it, clean it, package it, distribute it. We did that throughout the state. And our nonprofit community has stepped up tremendously to do that. And they're still doing it right now. And to a large extent, it's been made possible by the very generous people who have contributed. Unfortunately, we took a few steps forward, and we thought we started to look at the light at the end of the tunnel and started talking about recovery. Obviously, that was a little premature, and we're back at trying to flatten the curve again. And so a lot of our funding is going towards testing. It's going toward quarantining. We just put almost $250,000 into more testing, and a lot of money into mobile testing, so that a van can go out to communities where those clusters are, test them, and start to identify where those challenges are. And so, we're kind of back a little bit, but we still realize we learned a lot from that, and we think that going forward, we can do things a little differently as a community, so that we can start looking at recovery rather than again trying to flatten the curve of the pandemic.
Yeah. We talk about, of course, the challenges that the nonprofits face, of funding and things like that. But from your view, do you see any opportunities out there for nonprofits right now? I mean, is there a way for them to kind of reconfigure their thinking or their mission to help out more?
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. I mean, I think for many of us who are operating in the nonprofit community, the business model, we knew was getting a little aged. Many of our corporate sponsors were getting tired of attending events. It became more of, in some cases, an obligation. I won't say burden, but more of an obligation than a joy. And so, that fast forwarded us into that space now where we can't gather together in large numbers. And so we're having to look at different ways in generating the revenue that nonprofits need. They're starting to do virtual visits so that they're allowing donors and partners to be more intimate with the work they're doing. The work that you're doing right now, Deidre, is a perfect example of how a high-performing organization is pivoting to try to stay connected to their constituency. And you're a leader in that space right now, and others are watching the work that you're doing and seeing the success that you're having. And more of that's going to happen in our community. And what will happen is a lot more of that donation will go to your bottom line. I don't mean this in a bad way, to the facilities and the different hotels that were, that were getting the events of these fundraising events. The reality is that I think donors want to see more of their contribution go towards impact than to perhaps an event. And we're seeing a lot more of that right now. And that's resonating in some of the survey work we're getting from our donors.
I was on a phone call yesterday with some other museum and Japanese American organizations, and we were all talking about really the importance of banding together, even though we are on separate islands. Really, this is an opportunity for us to, take it to that next level. And if we're writing grants, to write grants that include maybe 2 or 3 of us, and looking at it for some opportunity, because we also have that feeling that sponsors are always being asked over and over to support the same kind of event. So I think the nonprofits are trying to rethink it and give back to those who are always donating to us. Give them a different way to be engaged with us. But we always talk about partnerships, and I think as a funder, Hawaii Community Foundation, do you look at the organizations that partner together? Do you look at that more favorably, or especially now? Is that something nonprofits could be doing to make funders a little bit happier with giving funds?
Yeah, leveraging and partnering is at the core of our work. You mentioned earlier the $12 million that was raised. It's closer to about 14 million. And about 11, almost 12 million out the door right now. Every dollar is probably leveraged at a 4x right now with the work that we're doing. And so, that 12 really equates to a lot more money, probably almost close to $50 million in total giving as a result of the collaborations that are happening with partners from around the country, quite frankly, who are coming in and seeing some of the work that this community is doing and supporting us there. I didn't mention earlier that as a result of our funds, we'll probably do about 65 million in direct contributions in 2020, maybe a little more, but we'll probably touch another 50 to 60 million as a result of some of the partnering that's happening as a result of this work. And so, about $110 million of philanthropy will be touching philanthropy as well as partnering, but with government as well as other organizations that will be hitting our community by the end of this year. And so I'm very proud of our team and the partners that are out there and the work that we're collectively doing.
Wow, those are some amazing numbers, and some awesome work that you were doing. Getting back to something you were talking about earlier, it's not just funding that Hawaii Community Foundation gives. You also share a lot of guidance, whether to the nonprofits and of course to the people for whom you engage their funds. But can you talk a little bit more about the guidance that you do give to nonprofits, and has that increased at all during COVID? I know you have different guidance programs, or you do grants for guidance.
I think of it more as a marriage that you have to invest in, and in order for it to return. As much as we want to share our perspectives and opinions, it's equally or even more important that we listen to the nonprofit community. They're the ones on the front line. They're the ones that are doing the heavy lifting. We look at the data, we try to inspire giving, but the reality, they're the bosses. They're the people that we report to and are getting information back, because they're the ones touching the beneficiaries. Without them, we're not active service providers. It's the nonprofit community that's out there doing the work, and so it's really the information we get from them, trying to dissect the data that we're getting from them, trying to be responsive to their needs in a timely manner. It was important that we, within within a week, I'd say, of the stand-up of the Hawaii Resilience Fund, we probably generated about $5 million and we had $4 million out the door, but we had to trust our nonprofit partners in what they were seeing out there and what they could execute. And so I think of it less about what we tell them and more about what they share with us, to be quite honest, Deidre.
Interesting. And, a lot of the money we assume goes to those very amazing nonprofits that help with the houseless, homeless population, food, eviction, whether it's the attorneys that are helping people not get evicted. And there are a lot of arts and cultural groups as well. Is there a place for grants to arts and cultural groups right now? And how would you respond to that question?
Well, I think, if there's a competitive advantage that we have in our country and in our world, it's the cultures that have blended here in Hawaii. I mean, we have the honor of having a host culture like the Hawaiian culture that is here and plays a prominent role in our community. And that's very important and something that I'm very passionate about. But equally important are the different cultures that have come here over the 100+ years and what they bring here. And that's, we are 10 generations in front of the world in what I've had the privilege to experience myself with my wife, to be introduced to her culture. And while she has both Hawaiian and Japanese blood, it was a lot of the Japanese culture that was introduced to me. And that is something we're 10 generations in on that. And that's a competitive advantage in the world. So as we start thinking about what the future of Hawaii is, that is going to be at the core of our advantage to rethink what our economy is going to look like. And then we need to think hard about how we do that right now. Around the country, the states, they lean on each other. San Francisco leans on Sacramento. Seattle leans on Portland. New York leans on Boston. They're all leaning out on each other. We can't do that in Hawaii. We lean out, we fall into this large, abyss of an ocean. We got to lean in, and it's forcing us to solve problems a lot differently here in Hawaii than we would than how people are across the country. And that's what's going to help us be much more resilient coming out of this. We're going to have to solve these problems without a lot of the help from outside our homelands. And so there's a space for the culture and the arts to help define what that is, because I believe, as I stated, that's where our competitive advantage sits.
Right. So what are you telling your donors right now? What advice are you giving to them?
As much as donors want to understand how the direct impact is going to be for the contributions they're making, the most valuable type of contribution is one that's unrestricted, one that allows a nonprofit to make those decisions because you trust in their judgment and you trust in their leadership and you trust in the work that they're going to execute based on the space that they're in. The most difficult funds to administer are the ones that have a whole bunch of restrictions on it. And it makes it very difficult. And you're probably familiar with that, Deidre, as someone who's guiding a nonprofit. And you have to trust in the governance of the organization, as I'm sure your donors do, of your governance, and trust in your leadership. And so we really advocate to our donors to give directly. To the best way to give it, quite frankly, is not through any one organization, even like HCF. You come to an organization like if you want to leverage other contributions, and we can help do that. But if you're passionate about a space, give directly to those nonprofits and give unconditionally and give unrestricted.
Those are good words. Yes, as a nonprofit, we do appreciate those unrestricted funds. Earlier, you were talking about the student from Kauai who sent in $20, the yoga instructor who donated all of their teaching funding to HCF. Are you, where are you seeing the new donors coming from? Maybe the Kauai student is an anomaly, but where do you see that new funding coming from?
I couldn't say it's any one specific area, Deidre. It's across the board right now. Hawaii across the country has one of the highest rates of giving. Our people are super generous, and there isn't any one area. We are seeing, though, with the work that we're doing collectively around trying to flatten the curve, and the way that we're partnering around food distributions and emergency grants, that we're getting some attention from some of the national foundations. We're seeing funding come in from organizations like the Stupski Foundation out of San Francisco. We're seeing funding come from an organization called Strata, who's based out of Indiana. We're seeing funds come from other community foundations from around the country where we're co-learning, and they tend to be larger contributions. And so we welcome that, and we have to share what we're learning with those partners.
That's interesting. You don't necessarily think of mainland funding coming in necessarily, but that's great to know. And so you're part of a larger network that really you're able to lean on them, and they're able to lean on you, and then give back to the community. That's fantastic.
Just to kind of address that, Deidre, I mean, there's over 900 community foundations around the country. But just a small group, a small handful of probably about 40 probably are larger than the $500 million, fund amount, aggregated fund amount. And so we do communicate a lot with that cohort of larger community foundations who are doing a lot of similar work in their space.
I have a couple of questions that came in. Let's see. Here's one. Any advice on how we can raise funds from the extremely wealthy who have second and third homes on our islands? Is this something HCF might help with?
Well, we're thinking a lot about that, and there's a lot of generous people out there who want to give. What we found is that the rigor by which they put forth to generate their resources is the same degree of rigor that they would like in the way they give it away. And so, when you're thinking about making an appeal to someone of a high net worth, they want to know the impact that they're going to have. And so, I would approach it with that mindset. They tend to be people who want to get up the pipeline versus, end of the pipeline. They want to eliminate the need to provide, 1,000, lunches at a park, where they want to get up the pipeline so there isn't 1,000 people needing, a free lunch at a park. And so they're looking hard at systems change, and quite frankly is one of the reasons why we're making that pivot to and that isn't the only reason, but we realize we kind of agree with them that, we all we're doing many times at the end of the pipeline is just reducing the acceleration of negative. We're kicking the can down the road in many ways, where we gotta eliminate the can. And to a large extent, when we get into conversations with these higher net worth people, that is something that is appealing to them, and it's appealing to us as well.
Right.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. You go to the nonprofit directors groups, and the mission of everybody is to finally work themselves out of a job. So if you're working in the homeless arena, you want to be able to work yourself out of a job because you have ended homelessness, you have ended hunger. So I think a lot of the nonprofits think that way too. It's just how do we get there? How do we change those systems? Where does it begin? And it's such an overwhelming discussion. And
Maui, Deidre, specifically sits in a very unique seat in our state to help do that. you have a population that is large enough to create scalable models, to solve some of these problems. It reduces, so like the state of Hawaii, when they're trying to solve a housing problem or an education problem, Maui at 185,000 people or so, is a big enough population to kind of build models. It reduces the financial risk of trying to solve a problem. It reduces the reputational risk of failure, because you're trying new things and you got to expect that you're going to have a degree of failure there. It reduces political risk, because many times you're going to be trying new policy measures, and it allows you to focus. And so, the neighbor islands, and I would say specifically Maui, sits in a pretty unique space, and we view Maui that way. And you are going to see our organization pay a lot more attention to Maui, not to impose our will on them, but to learn from them about how we can solve some of these problems and share it with the other counties.
Well, Maui no Ko'oi.
Absolutely.
But it's true. I being in nonprofit and in government for a while, there is that willingness on behalf of government and the nonprofits to really work on changing the way things are and making them better for the greater community. And all of the islands, all of the government agencies do give very willingly to their nonprofit community. But I think if the statistics are still the same, Maui County government is terribly generous to their nonprofits. And I think we're very lucky over here on Maui, and would love to have that conversation on how can we take it to that next level and really effect a greater change. Speaking of change, someone else wrote a question in early on about change. So it says, you mentioned the change initiative is culture, or one of the pillars is culture and education. What types of projects does HCF support in these arenas?
Well, specifically to education, as I'd mentioned earlier, it's one of the most prevalent inequities in our community right now. There are over 40,000 kids aged 3 to 5, and there's only 20,000 pre-K seats available. So again, even if you had the resources to send your kid to preschool, in many cases, there's not going to be a seat for you. And what happens in that situation is it obviously when demand is higher, price goes up. And so, we've highlighted that as a primary initiative for us. We're partnering with an organization called the Hawaii Executive Collaborative, an organization that is led by a gentleman by the name of Dwayne Karisu. He might be familiar to some of your leaders of your organization. An extremely generous, brilliant, and committed man. His Hawaii Executive Collaborative is a conglomeration of over 100 CEOs and leaders from across the state that represent all parts of our community. And they've adopted the change framework as a means by which they apply their work. And they partnered with Hawaii Community Foundation to eliminate this inequity. And without their help, quite frankly, we would not have been able to introduce that legislation at the 2020 legislature to mandate that by the year 2030, every child aged 3 to 5 has an opportunity for pre-K access. Couple other key leaders that were driving this for us was Speaker Scott Saiki, as well as Finance Chair Sylvia Luke in the House. And then on the Senate side, Senate President Ron Kochi was intimately involved, along with Senator Donovan Dela Cruz. And so when you got that kind of legislative capacity, all looking at the same metric, you have the opportunity to do some great things. And so that one I'd say is very high on our priority list right now.
That's fantastic. Congratulations. What an exciting group. Let's see. Does Hawaii Community Foundation Collaborative get donations from the Ali'i trusts? just popped up?
Yeah, the Hawaii Community Foundation doesn't do much. We might administer a little bit of the scholarships of some of the elite trusts, but very little. But we do view them as partners, and we do a lot of collaborating giving. With Commitment Schools, there's some work that's being done there, specifically around education, some work being done around the environment. We launched a freshwater initiative back in 2013 or 14 that established a goal of creating 100 million gallons of new fresh water by the year 2030. And so the philosophy was around, rather than trying to argue for the limited resource, let's go grow more. And if there's any island or county that knows about the challenges of water best, it would be probably Maui County. With the challenges that you folks have faced. And so, this initiative is something that the LE trusts have been active in. And we think to date right now that through the policy measures, through the education measures that have been quietly adopted over the past few years, we're creating about 32 to 35 million gallons of new fresh water every day as a result of this initiative. But our goal again is to create 100 million gallons by the year 2030. So we have a long way to go.
Oh, congratulations. Someone texted in, what is your one piece of advice for the nonprofits right now? Is it a message of hope? Is it a hang in there? Is it go back and review your missions?
Yeah. I'm an eternal optimist. I mean, we are going to get through this, and we're going to come out a much stronger community. And we all have to lean on each other. I mean, they're not alone right now. Businesses around our state are struggling, and we got to lock arms, and we got to get each other through this. I think the first and foremost is don't lose that hope. And you got to lean on. We all got to lean on neighbors. If they see areas that they feel they can make a difference, reach out to us. We are, again, hyper-focused on some of the emergency needs of our community. If you're in a space right now, perhaps where maybe the arts and culture sits, don't be afraid to pivot, to align yourself in where one of the more emergency priorities might be. You're doing it right now, Deidre, with your elderly care facilities there, as well as the child care facilities. Those are essential needs of our community. And to the extent that those nonprofits can pivot to be a part of that space, I would say, make that move, knowing that when you can, you're going to pivot back to your core service that you were trying to move. And so, again, I would say, keep that hope up. We're going to get through this, and pivot where you can.
Great. Let's see, another one just came in. Before I ask that though, you talk about the missions and the foundations of the various organizations. For us, we are rooted in what we call the Nisei values, the values of patience and responsibility and loyalty and courage, all the things that the men and their families made as their foundation as they were at war and came home. And I think a lot of the values that we talk about as Nisei values are also values of aloha, of caring and giving and taking care of your neighbor. Do you think that these values, whatever you call them, do you think that they can help us get through COVID?
They're more important today than at any time in the history of our state, I believe, right now. The selflessness values, the thinking of others, the humility that the Nisei values have brought to Hawaii are extremely important right now. And, again, while I spoke passionately about it from my personal experience, I believe strongly that's going to be at the core of where we are going forward. That's what's going to get us through right now. It's not going to be sitting independently and banging our chests about what any one of us as leaders or organizations can do. It's going to be what we can do together. And if we take that perspective, again, we'll get out of this much faster. So I couldn't agree more, Deidre, that the values that the Nisei community has been advocating for and have represented are core to our future right now, the immediate future especially.
We just, sometimes we always try to hold those values as our foundation, and sometimes it's difficult with everything that's going on to keep moving forward, but it's fantastic when people like yourself come on. I think Paul Yonamine was also asked a question by one of our high school interns, and the question was, are we going to be okay? And he also had that message of hope that you just shared of, yes, we can get through this.
I do want to, may I touch on one area that's kind of relevant to this, Deidre, that may, I hope, resonate with some of our viewers. I'm a believer, many of the Nisei veterans, came back to Hawaii in the 50s, and they were part of a movement, a civic movement that Hawaii had a really good run on. They stepped up, much like we're trying to do right now, to eliminate inequities that they saw in their community. They rose because they didn't have, equal access to education. Central Pacific Bank was founded because, members of their community couldn't get a fair shake at getting banking services, and they stood up civically and engaged. And what happens though, and I kind of want to run this. This is kind of, in our family, what we're trying to be conscious about is, they fought and they sacrificed for the next generation, and that next generation, which was my parents and my grandparents, benefited as a result of that work. But they're reminded every day from those who sacrificed, how fortunate they are for what they have, because it's something their parents didn't have. The next generation is reminded, when they celebrate grandpa and grandma's birthdays. We come together as a family and, they're reminded. They say, hey, your grandma and your grandpa, back in the 50s, they really sacrificed. And that's why my life is better, and that's why your life is better. But their life is getting really good at that time. And then the next generation happens, and, it's probably when their grandpa or their grandma passes. And maybe they didn't know that person very well, but then they're told the whole story. But it's not reminded and ingrained in them every day. And unfortunately, and I'm not saying this happens to everybody, but as a community, we kind of become what they fought for, some 60, 70, 80 years ago. And we got to restart that civic engine again, because those inequities sit in our community again. And we're going to have to take a page out of the sacrifices that people like the Nisei community made back in the 50s to start getting on that glide path again. And I feel very strongly about that. And we're all going to have to sacrifice a little bit in order for us to get on a glide path that the next generation can benefit from.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. Yes, I mean, sacrifice is a word that we talk about all the time, and sometimes it gets lost. But for us, we love it when that next and next generation will come in to maybe watch a movie about the Lost Battalion, or go into the archive, or have us bring things out from the archives of their great grandparent,
right,
that they can see what they did. But we don't talk about sacrifice like we used to. It used to be you heard it all the time, and now we don't. And how do you pivot back to that without? But I guess we're all sacrificing right now. So now more than ever, people are going to understand that.
Well, we don't have to look far, Deidre, for examples. They're on your list. They're people right there. Those are the ones that can show us the way. They did it one time, but it's our turn to step up now and make those sacrifices.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking your time today. You have obviously so much on your palette right now, you and your team, and we're so thankful that you are where you are and really helping to guide the entire state and all of the nonprofits out of this very odd time that we're going through. I just want to let everybody know we have some upcoming events, and then I'll come back to you, Micah, if I may, for some closing remarks. For those of you who are interested in our events, coming up on the 15th of September, Stanford Carr will be our guest speaker. He's the president of Stanford Carr Development, does a lot of affordable housing, and he will be talking about housing and affordable housing, especially now during this time of COVID. So that's on the 15th of September at 4 o'clock. It's a Tuesday. We will be sending out an email about that. And then our next Afternoon with the Author series is going to be with Lee Cataluna on September 19th. That's a Saturday at 1:30. She's going to come on and talk about the backstory to her book, The Folks You Meet in Longs. So if you have read it or haven't read it, either way, you're in for a treat. That is on the 19th. And then toward the end of the month, on the 24th of September, Kurt Matsumoto of Pulama Lanai will be coming on to talk about visitor industry and everything that's going on over in Lanai right now, as well as talk a little bit about the large and long history of the Nisei from Lanai, along World War II history there as well. So again, you will all be receiving an email from us. We hope you stay engaged, and we hope you sign up for some of the upcoming events. We have events scheduled throughout the year, but I'd like to turn it back to Micah Kane and see just if you have some closing remarks, some inspirational words to get us through these next couple of months.
Well, I do want to say you have a nice list of people coming up to speak to. They all are smart and just genuinely awesome people. Stanford, as a Maui boy, as you know, is gonna be a great talk. And so I look forward to hearing how that goes, Deidre. I just want to thank your leadership and you for giving us the opportunity to be with you folks today. You know, while we're going through some tough times right now, we're going to come out of this, you know, stronger than ever. I feel very strongly about that. We're seeing leaders rise up in our community that we never had before. We're seeing strength in our community that we never knew we had. And, you know, as much as it's tough where we're at right now, there's no question in my mind that we're going to get through this. And when we start looking at the latter part of our 21st century, the middle of this century, we're going to be in a really good place. And so I ask you to join me in staying the course, keeping a positive spirit. Please continue to give where you can, and look forward to a bright future for all of us. So thank you, Deidre.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it. Again, this talk will be on our Nisei Veterans Memorial Center YouTube channel within about a week and a half. So we invite you to rewatch it, share it with your colleagues. And until next time, we wish you all a very good week. Be well, stay safe, and a hui hou. Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.